please join us. Thank you very much. So soon it's 10:30. So I would like to pass the microphone to the moderator of this event, Ms. Nene Fukizawa from OECC.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me clearly? Thank you. Everybody, we're gonna start this event right now. So if anybody's interested, please have a seat. Anyone is welcome to join us. Okay. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Good morning. And it is an honor to welcome you all to our side event about partnership to strengthen transparency for co-innovation, or also called PaSTI. The theme of this event is shedding a light on greenhouse gas emission in supply chain in Asia. I am Nene Fukizawa, as introduced, from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. Now I'll be the moderator in the beginning of this side event. To start off the event, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Ono Hiroshi, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, Government of Japan, for opening remarks. Mr. Ono, please take the floor.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for joining this side event. And I would also like to thank OECC, Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, for co-hosting this side event. I'd like to say a few words at the beginning of this seminar on behalf of the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. To limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, mitigation actions for all stakeholders, including the private sector, must be urgently strengthened. Actually, it is becoming a prerequisite for private entities to disclose climate-related information in order to participate in global supply chains. Such transparency could be warranted to meet the requirements of global programs such as TCFD or science-based targets. An important question here for private entity is how to demonstrate the transparency to be concrete. The first step to be taken would be to make its GHG emissions visible. In other words, to quantify how much greenhouse gases the entity is emitting and identify potential areas for emission reduction. Domestic policies and regulations, including a system to measure and report GHG emissions, should be designed to create incentives for private entities, such as enabling an enhanced access to ESG investments. With this perspective, the ASEAN-Japan Climate Change Action Agenda 2.0, which Japan put forward during the ASEAN-Japan Summit meeting held last year, includes transparency as one of its 3 pillars. Under the transparency pillar, Ministry of the Environment Japan has been implementing PaSTI since 2018. PaSTI promotes the engagement of state and non-state actors, in particular private entities, to enhance transparency in terms of GHG emissions at the facility level. PaSTI supports partner governments in developing measurement, reporting, and verification MRV systems of GHG emissions, and also supports the private sector in applying facility-level monitoring and reporting practices throughout its supply chain. To strengthen the competency of private entities in the partner countries in meeting transparency requirements, and to take advantage of ESG investments expanding worldwide, we would like to help accelerate information disclosure through PaSTI, this project. I hope that discussions here today will lead to further improvement of transparency and to help facilitate business activities aligned with the Paris climate goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ono, for your encouraging remarks. Next, we have a recorded video of the opening remark from His Excellency Ekapa Pantobon, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, ASEAN Secretariat.
Excellency Ono Hiroshi, Vice Minister for the Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of the Environment of Japan. Mr. Samti, Deputy Secretary General, the National Council for Sustainable Development, Ministry of the Environment, Cambodia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the ASEAN Secretariat, I am extremely grateful and honored to address you today at the Japan side event at the UNFCCC COP27 to highlight the ASEAN and Japan's strong commitment and cooperation in tackling the issue of climate change at the global scene. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the government of Japan, particularly the Ministry of the Environment of Japan and the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center for organizing this special gathering and allowing my virtual participation, as well as the others, to discuss and to further leverage the support and actions towards realizing the climate resilient societies. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we have seen and heard in the discussions in the last few days of the UNFCCC COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, there really is an urgent need to collective action to address the ongoing climate crisis. There has been the growing evidence of the severe impacts of the climate change to millions of people around the world and in the ASEAN region, including the intensified climate-induced disasters, such as storms, floods, and droughts. Southeast Asia region is also facing the serious increase of the number of the climate-related hazards in all the ASEAN member states. For this reason, we believe that the ASEAN puts the climate actions as one of our top priorities in our work with the development partners, including Japan. We are delighted that the 15th ASEAN-Japan Dialogue on the Environmental Cooperation in September 2021 has endorsed the ASEAN-Japan Climate Action Agenda 2.0, which aspires to strengthen the regional and the local climate actions, especially on transparency mitigation, and adaptation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that addressing the climate change requires multi-stakeholder participation, and the private sector is among the important player in the climate change mitigation. On this note, I'm pleased to highlight the progress of the ASEAN-Japan ongoing collaboration through the partnership to strengthen transparency for the code innovation, or PaSTI, which engages the private sector to strengthen the facility, the level monitoring and the reporting efforts. This important initiative will support the GHG emissions transparency and thus contributing to the ASEAN region's commitment to global climate agenda, including the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. I trust that today's discussion will provide valuable inputs and insights into the applicable tools for the ASEAN member states to take into consideration in the developing the transparency system in ASEAN member states with the participation of state and non-state actors under this initiative, and contribute significantly to global stocktake that will take place in 2023, which the ASEAN is preparing to share. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to acknowledge and congratulate the ASEAN member states, Japan, partners, businesses, and other non-state actors for joining this global effort in tackling the issues of climate change. I hope that this event will allow us to reflect on the possible avenues for cooperation as they will champion the climate change mitigation in ASEAN and contribute to the 50th commemorative year of the ASEAN-Japan dialogue relations and ASEAN-Japan Environment Week next year. I highly encourage the ASEAN member states, our partners, and the other interested parties to closely collaborate with ASEAN Working Group on the climate change and other ASEAN sectoral bodies to further strengthen the regional partnerships for a just and inclusive climate transition. I'm confident that through our shared vision and joint efforts, we can strive towards decarbonized development to ensure a green, sustainable, and resilient society. Thank you very much.
And that was it for the recording. We are very grateful to have his comments. Okay, next, I would like to introduce Mr. Samthi, Ministry of Environment, Cambodia, former chair of AWGCC, for the keynote speech. Mr. Thi, may I invite you to the floor?
Thank you very much. It is my great honor to be here as a former chair of the working group, climate working group, ASEAN Climate Change Working Group. I'm very delighted to be here and see some old friends here. A long journey in climate change negotiation. As we know, the climate change is very grave, and all countries has impact, climate change impact. This year, Cambodia has also very vulnerable to climate change. We have flooded and it destroyed our rice field, and at this season is harvest season. Yesterday, I attended the dinner hosted by Singapore, and we also talked about our region that affect to climate change. So this is caused by the greenhouse gas emission. Especially, we have to follow the recent finding from IPCC report and also from meteorological report WMO that mentioned that it 50-50 in 2026 we could not the 1.5 degree will reach in 2026. So we have to find the solution. What kind of solution we should mitigate the greenhouse gas emission? ASEAN and environmental climate change is one of the ASEAN put climate change and environment is the very important key milestone for us. And in the region, ASEAN is fully committed in the objective of the Paris Agreement, and we recognize the importance of ambitious 2030 NDC target. So all the ASEAN has submitted the NDC target, and also some countries has submitted the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality. In response to climate change at the regional level, ASEAN Working Group has proposed an action consists of 8 core elements, namely climate adaptation, long-term planning assessment of NDCs, climate change mitigation, climate modeling and assessment, MRV, and stocktake of greenhouse gas emissions, climate financing and market, growth sectoral coordination, and the last one is technology transfer. With Japan, with partnership to strengthen transparency for innovation, PaSTI is one of the key pillars of ASEAN-Japan climate action agenda, which will promote an engagement of non-state and state actor to enhance transparency of greenhouse gas emission on facility level. It can support the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change to achieve the action plan. It is also very important to review the need of private sector in transparency of greenhouse gas emission reduction. To do that, I think we also need to identify what kind of capacity they need, because it's very new. Some private sector, they do not know what is the transparency, what is the Paris Agreement. So when we just come up with the MRV system, maybe we forgot what is the beginning of the engagement, the private sector engagement in greenhouse gas emission reduction. I still remember when we are under Kyoto Protocol, we try to identify a lot of opportunity for the CDM project, the Clean Development Mechanism project. I see my colleague here, Mr. Mori-san, also very active to support Cambodia in identify the CDM project. So the first step, we have to identify what is the potential for private sector to engage in greenhouse gas emission reduction. This including the baseline assessment and also the capacity. We have to buy in, let them buy in what is the benefit for private sector to engage in environmental protection, especially the climate change. Also that we in Cambodia, we have also received support from ICAT. Mr. Henning here is the coordinator of the ICAT from UN from ICAT coordination office. Yeah, so he also support. We also receive support from ICAT to conduct the MRV system for energy sector and also for transport sector. So Cambodia is very happy to have a partnership with our partner in the region and also with the international organization to support capacity building here. By that, I think I would like to conclude my keynote. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. T. We always appreciate your cooperation. Okay, now let us move on to the discussion session. To start off this session, I would like to invite Ms. Kisato Nagakuro, researcher of OECC. She will give us introductory presentation on PaSTI, Partnership to Strengthen Transparency for Co-Innovation. Nagakuro-san, may I invite you to the floor?
Okay, thank you everyone. Good morning. I'm Sato Nagakuro from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. It is my great pleasure to deliver the presentation for you today. Before the discussion session, I'd like to provide the introductory presentation for PaSTI project. Okay, let me share my screen. Thank you. Okay, now PaSTI. The PaSTI stands for the Partnership to Strengthen Transparency for Co-Innovation and focus strengthening the capacity of ASEAN to formulate and implement domestic transparency system, in particular facility level. Our actions are two-folded. One is regional activities, namely PaSTI Jive. That's endorsed by the ASEAN Working Group Climate Change, mean AWGCC. The main focus of the activities is development of guidelines for common measurement and reporting framework across ASEAN regions. The other one is bilateral activities. PaSTI has been supporting institutional development, sharing methodologies, and surveying the incentives in Vietnam, Philippines, and Thailand so far. Under the PaSTI JIVE, or Japan ASEAN Integration Fund JIVE project, we will hold another side event from 12 to 1:30 at Singapore Pavilion on November 17th. The event will be integrated by the Japanese and the Singaporean ministers, and we will introduce the result of the development ASEAN guidelines. The PaSTI project is aiming to bring co-innovation in the area of climate change. In particular, facility-level GHG measurement and reporting. In harnessing the co-innovation, the partner countries and Japan have constantly shared knowledge and experiences. There are three objectives, as you can see. First, institutional development. Institutional development of GHG emission measurement and reporting systems. Second, capacity building for enhancing knowledge or lesson learned on measurement and reporting activities interactively between Japan and partner countries. And last but not least, mainstream transparency activities by the private sectors. It is obvious that some company may feel it's burdensome for the companies if they need to measure and report climate-related information and report climate report climate-related information only for the sake of climate. However, if there are incentives, those companies will be more willing to act on climate mitigation together with measuring and reporting of GHG emissions. So the incentives of mitigation and Sorry. Sorry. Okay. So the most important thing is incentives. Incentives on mitigation and GHG emissions M and R are the essential. Sorry. Fly. That's Egypt. That's Egypt. Okay. Next, in the context of the developing countries, we often encounter the challenges in lack of incentives, and self-help efforts sometimes may not be effective. In this case, we need to strengthen the incentive parts, such as ESG investment or corporate value improvements. For the private sector, GHG emission disclosure will open up opportunities to approach on different incentives. Let's say recognizing its own status on emissions and then realize the necessity for further action leading to emission reduction. Then this leads nearly equal to cost reduction. Or those information can be provided to the key stakeholders and help to report entities to assess their climate risks, etc. In this event, I'd like to shedding a light on the mainstreaming transparency activities by the private sectors, and also for how to effectively engagement private companies centered on the supply chain. And the GHG emission disclosure in alignment with TCFD or targeting setting through SBT with financial institutions. This slide shows, of course, improvement of facility level GHG emission transparency is somehow related to and beneficial to national climate policy. Without facility level MRV, the national government have access to national GHG inventory, which are in many cases statistics level data. And they are not necessarily accurate to use as a reinforced to specific type of mitigation policy and measures. However, with facility level MRV, national governments gain access to data on specific subsectors with historical trends or comparisons between facilities, etc. Such data, government can develop benchmarks, standards, supports measures, carbon tax, or emission trading and other matters. On the top of it, there are some sectors, such as IPPU, where aggregation of facility level data can almost directly be used as national GHG inventory. The cement sector is very typical case. GHG emission M&R is important for us to reach Paris 1.5 degrees goal. National governments, which have their NDCs, the low emission data from the private sector is essential to tracking of their NDCs implementation. Hence, strengthening private sector climate transparency will support national government's obligation to report to UNFCCC. Okay, now I'd like to play the video. This video presents live voice perspective on GHG emission information disclosure by 3 different actors, namely government, private sector, and financial institution. Please pay attention to the monitor in front of you. Okay, thank you for your patience, everyone. Now, shall we go?
Now let us think about the significance of the reporting system from the standpoints of three representative stakeholders: governments, the private sector, and financial institutions or investors. First, for governments, GHG emissions reports can be a powerful tool for capturing a more accurate picture of domestic GHG emissions. To reduce GHG emissions by the private sector, it is fundamental that each entity first measures and understands the amount of GHGs emitted by its own activities. Next, as for the private sector, they can revisit the amount of energy consumption and raw materials used by reviewing how GHG emissions occur. With such information, private sector companies may consider how to reduce costs through energy efficiency and improving production processes. Furthermore, companies often disclose GHG emissions in their integrated reports. In response to the recent trend towards carbon disclosure expected by their business partners in the supply chain. Also, GHG emissions are increasingly emphasized by trading companies and investors as one of the criteria for evaluating corporate value. GHG information disclosed by entities is becoming more and more important for financial institutions and investors. Data reported by companies can be used as a certain index for making decisions on ESG investments, etc. Responses to climate change risks of investee companies can be an important reference on top of the business profitability for financial institutions and investors. Since companies are expected to take a more sensible response to climate change risks, financial institutions may sometimes see disclosed GHG information is a critical index for their investment. At this point, we will explore cases of how the reporting system functions in greater detail. Here, let us introduce an example from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan.
Japan introduced a mandatory GHG accounting and reporting system and act on promoting global warming countermeasures. Any entities that emit more than 3,000 tons CO2 equivalent are subject to reporting. As of August 2022, this system covers approximately 13,000 business entities. Mandatory accounting and reporting system has evolved over time from the enactment in 2006. So for example, from May 2022, we introduced a new electronic reporting system, which we call EEGS or EGUS. EGUS is a one-stop system from report preparation to submission under 3 different statutes, namely the Energy Conservation Act, the Act on Global Warming Countermeasures, and the F-gas Fluorocarbons Act. With this system, business entities can comply with their obligations more easily all at once, while we, the government, are also able to collect, compile, and utilize the data more easily, so that we provide digestible information for business operators. Using these data, we expect businesses to find more opportunities of their mitigation actions, including supply chain management. We further plan to develop EEGS to cover voluntary reporting. With these efforts, we will create more opportunities for decarbonization actions by business entities.
Next, there'll be an introduction of what is happening at ASICS of Manufacture Company.
ASICS was founded in 1949 with the purpose of contributing to nurture, youth, and the development of society through sports. Today, about 80% of our sales are from outside Japan. Our founding philosophy, Anima Sana in Corpore Sano, a sound mind in a sound body, express our desire for people around the world to live healthy, both physically and mentally. In order to achieve this, one of our biggest challenges is to achieve a sound earth which we can play sports. ASICS was the first sporting goods company who has set the greenhouse gas reduction target by 2030, officially approved by the Science Based Target initiatives. We are committed to be net zero by 2050 and have set ambitious target to reduce greenhouse gas emission from our own and supply chain operation by 63%. We believe it is our responsibility to work with a partner to reduce carbon footprint throughout the value chain. More than 90% of our total CO2 emission comes from Scope 3, mainly contributed from suppliers' production in Southeast Asia. We actively work with strategic suppliers to upload resource usage data such as electric power and natural gas into our emission data management system. Ensure accurate data is the first step, and with the cooperation from our supplier, we are able to benchmark performance and discuss about the reduction measures together. To ensure the implementation of Scope 3 emission reduction is effective, we encourage our suppliers to align with our target to maintain Earth's temperature rise within 1.5 C and shift to renewable energy. We have continuous conversation with the suppliers to understand their situation and the challenges and support them where necessary. As a result of our collective action, together we have successfully reduced Scope 3 emission by 20% compared with 2015. We are seeing more and more suppliers taking action, shifting to renewable energy in Southeast Asia. We will continue to collaborate with our stakeholders and take action toward net zero in order to have more resilient supply chain and enable people to enjoy sports on a healthy planet. Thank you.
Okay, now let's move to the discussion session moderated by Makoto Kato from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center. So I'd like to hand over to Kato-san. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to our side event. We're very happy to have you on the floor, and also here we have excellent speakers on the floor, and the panelists. We have many panelists today, and also we have another panelist online participating from, I think, Bodaro, you're still in Osaka. Not yet in Manila, but we have panelists. So here I would like to make for this panel discussion a very interactive manner. Some of you may remember in Glasgow for COP26, we had actually the very beginning of this kind of discussion, and some of the panelists, like Nicolette and Marisan, you were in the meeting, and we had the very exciting discussion. So I hope we are going to have another exciting session today. And today, we are focusing on greenhouse gas emissions at corporate or facility level. And then also we are shedding a light on greenhouse gas emissions in supply chain. So this is something a little bit new from last year, because in the last year's discussions, we actually discussed, of course, greenhouse gas emissions at the, for example, listed companies in stock markets. Many companies, including Asian countries, they are capable of delivering for emissions information for disclosure purpose. But of course, we need to work together with partner countries, which includes smaller and medium-sized enterprises. That was part of the discussion last time. But today, because we have an advantage of participants or panelists from various backgrounds. So maybe I should start introducing panelists one by one. Then we can ask questions to them. So here together with me, Dr. Von Sok. He's the head of Environment Division, ASEAN Secretariat. Mr. Von Sok, thank you very much for participation. And then right next to me, next to Mr. Von Sok is Kun Natavut in Throat. He's a Sustainable Development Director, Siam Cement Group, Thailand. Thank you very much. And then also Mr. Henning Busser. He's a very famous guy in the transparency world. Of course, he's from the initiative of Climate Action Transparency, ICAT. Yes. And then Nicolette Bartlett, thank you very much. I'm coming back to the event again. She is a Chief Impact Officer of CDP. Yes. And then my old friend, very good friend, Miss Mari Yoshitaka. She is from the Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting. She is the lead expert in this world of climate change, mitigation, carbon market, etc. And then, can I have Bonar online? Hello?
Yes, Karasan, I'm here.
Yes, Bonar Loreto, where are you now?
I'm in the airport, Karasan.
Oh, you're at the airport in Osaka, maybe.
Yes, Osaka. Yes,
Oh, okay.
waiting
Yeah,
for a
he,
flight.
he kindly offered for his participation to this meeting on his way. Actually, well, he's on vacation with his family, but thank you very much for your kind offer. Okay,
You're
so
welcome.
now you see we have a rich series of figures for here. So I would like to start for reading out for questions, guiding questions. Can I have our guiding questions up here now? On the screen, please. Okay. So we have three different questions here. Of course, because for people here have various backgrounds, so that you can actually frame for these questions as you like, and also you can extend to whatever you want to share with us today. But nevertheless, I would like to start for reading out this guiding questions. The first one: what are current and future requirements in achieving a decarbonized corporate management for in South Asian countries? I think what this sounds easy, but maybe in practice it's very difficult. And I think my my Thai friend from SCG, well, I think he's willing to tackle this. But anyways, the second one: how can we introduce and reinforce incentives such as ESG investments for the private sector together with GHG emissions transparency? And the third one: what are challenges and opportunities for the private sector in Southeast Asian countries? Of course, not necessarily South Asian countries, but also other countries maybe, in introducing Scope 3 emissions disclosure reporting through supply chains. So I think this is a quite new and challenging question, but I would like to start asking Mr. Bonsok to respond.
So thank you very much for inviting me to join this panelist. And it's a great pleasure from ASEAN Secretariat to join you all. I mean, as you may have noted, ASEAN Secretariat mostly working with the public sector. However, we believe the private sector and also facility level, corporate level, play a very important role in this climate change action agenda. So first of all, I just would like to thank to the OECC for organizing this event and the government of Japan for for this important cooperation. I mean, for the first question, what is the situation and what is the required action and so on? I think it's from ASEAN region, as you may have noticed, well developed and fast developed in the way of 600 million population. So no doubt there's a lot of development going on. So by that, you may account for a number of various project program initiative that under the corporate responsibility and that is come from multiple sort of sector. So their mission, their vision and mission is for business purpose to make sure it's really themselves survive, but also to prosper of the region. With that, there's some also aspect that they need to take into consideration. I think a lot of things involved with the bank and financial institution. So look from the video clip, I mean, it really provides three important key actors. So one of the main key actors is private sector, and private sector, it's not work alone. Work with the end consumer, work with the government, work with the finance institution. So in order to address the diversity of the sort of business sector from ASEAN, I believe there need to be a well-coordinated action among a key player, among the four. That's what I believe. And what is the mechanism and process to guide that the four sector working together in ASEAN? It's really a challenge, but I may not be elaborate challenge, but this is a situation in ASEAN context. And With that, I strongly believe the key player, the key actor from the four sector can discuss and particularly find a common ground. What is common ground mean here? I mean, it's a common understanding, common process, common approach. I mean, one thing that under this program, I mean, the MOV system, where they provided a sort of clear standard, clear process, clear engagement of the consultation and so on, to validate, to provide this sort of important connection from all key players. So upon the agreement of those actors, we believe this really a way forward for ASEAN region. So I end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, you actually increased our challenge, but I think yes, that's true. Well, the ASEAN is now in the very important process of integration, and then companies in ASEAN countries, well, they are working not only, for example, Indonesian companies not only working in Indonesia, well, they are working in Cambodia and others, and Thai companies, of course. Well, I think it's one of the biggest and also strongest group, together with maybe Singaporeans. Well, very aggressive policy of like extending their production sites across Asian countries. Well, that is actually the trend in these days. However, well, that in that case, for the those companies are also willing to work on some common standardized work and also in compliance with the international standard. So I think that's a one important point that we highlight for as a current situation or phenomena of ASEAN countries. Okay, now so I am trying to increase more and more challenges, but okay, well, Kun Natawut, can I share your perspectives?
Hello, everyone. Natawut from ACG. Thank you very much that I have a chance to share my vision and share my thought here at Japan Pavilion COP27. In my thought of view, I think that the first thing is about a trend that wait for us. It's about the low carbon society and green carbon society that corporate have taken into account from now on, and then set the pathway to move toward based on the thing that we have, based on the infrastructure in each country. Right now in ACG, we are operate in the Asian Plus. We call ourselves. We have a Cambodia operation. We have Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, and we also have a footprint in China and Europe and India also. So why we call ourselves like a Asian Plus. But with this, it's come up with a number of challenges, right? But we start from the thing that we're familiar with. We start from the scope 1 and 2, and we set the baseline based on the 2020 to reduce this emission by 20% of that one. But for scope 3, and everyone in this room already know about the challenge of it, we start a bit by bit, but start from our home base first. And right now we come up with the disclosure for these things already. And we are in the program of that, the science target for 24 months. With this, it's helped us to navigate in the right way, in the right direction, with the right policy. Our CEO, Mr. Roland Siopat, already said about the ESG flow path strategy. This is guide our employees inside the ACG corporate and inside every country that we have the footprint to move toward in the same direction. We have set net zero for 2050 already, and we try to change the green portfolio of our revenue stream. About 70% of them by 2030 is come up with this portfolio. And we also move toward in the renewable energy in order to make an energy transition, in order to make it greener and greener, right? And we also help the society in order to make inequality reduction in every place that we have the operation. We not just see the ESGs just for the decarbonization, but we try to make the right balance for the holistic views of that. And we also need the collaboration, not just for the nation, but we need the collaboration around the globe. And we just announced about the first net zero Thailand roadmap in Thailand Pavilion yesterday, and we are the first nation that we help each other inside the country and collaborate with the global perspective, like a Global Cement Concrete Association, to bring down the roadmap stamp in Thailand with the cooperation of the Thailand Cement Manufacturing Association and Thailand Concrete Association. So you can see like we try to work with each other like a whole value chain. And the first important thing is about the collaboration that move toward that part. And trust through transparency is quite important for corporate labor as well, in order to make it clear, make it like we have to do like when we measure it, we have the monitoring it, and we come up with, we can manage it and we can mitigate it. And with the four M, we do believe that we can move toward to achieve our challenge goal in the future and achieve our ambition at the long-term goal in 2050.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Natamun. I think it's great for that the Siam Cement Group, the SCG, is one of the leading cement company group in Thailand, but also across Asia. They have been very active. But also SCG is a very famous in terms of the very advanced concept of the sustainability. And then I really recommend you to read for their sustainability report. For his boss, vice president, actually gave me a hard copy, and he says, "Well, study this before visiting." And I actually, I was lucky. I have read the sustainability report, but there are lots of good ideas we can learn from this company. And then also the company is also helping other partner companies to engage and improve their transparency and climate actions. Okay, thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Henning to start sharing your views.
Thank you very much, and very good morning, colleagues and friends of transparency in this wonderful pavilion. Many thanks to the Ministry of Environment of Japan for inviting ICAT to be here. I'm very pleased to join this event, and also pleased to collaborate with PaSTI, because I think they are doing fantastic work that is very nicely complementary to the work that ICAT does. And so it's a wonderful to have that partnership. I want to emphasize, give three perspectives, which I think are different but very relevant here. So the first of is the national perspective for the government. The second is the corporate perspective, which of course is central here. And the third one, then the international perspective. ICAT works mainly in supporting governments in building their transparency framework. So that's where we are at home and where we are active. And one of the aspects that we are supporting governments with is to expand their transparency frameworks so that they can incorporate non-state actors and subnationals. Many of the mitigation actions that are key to achieving decarbonization, but even already key to achieving some ambitious targets, require the engagement of the private sector, but also of subnationals. And we have a methodology as ICAT to aggregate and integrate the contribution from the private sector and from the subnational level. But of course, before you can do that, you have to measure it. And that means we are offering countries capacity building activities at the subnational level or for private sector actors, so that they actually know the methodologies to measure emissions, but also to measure other aspects of the climate transparency framework that are important. And that has been an effective way of for countries then to raise their ambitions in their NDC. So one example where we did this was Colombia. That's not in the ASEAN region, but it is, I think, a nice example where they looked at urban sector, but also at the contribution of companies for the transport sector, and were able to increase the ambition level for their emission reductions at the national level by 8%, which is important for a country like Colombia, which then was moving over all the NDC ambition from 20 to 50%. So significant improvements. A lot has already been said on the corporate side, and I don't want to repeat what was very well presented by PaSTI. I think this ability to measure emissions is absolutely critical. I just want to add one additional aspect, just to make your challenges a bit greater, and that's the adaptation side, because I think companies also need to be able to assess their resilience, to assess the risks that they face in terms of being vulnerable to climate impacts. And that often is also part of national NDCs and has to be integrated at the national level. And it certainly is something very close to the financial viability of companies, and hence very much in the self-interest, as much as also a good understanding of the emission profile of companies is. And that brings me then to the third point, the international level. And of course, here, a region like ASEAN is not in isolation. It's very much integrated into the global economy. And that is also a desire for big and small companies in the ASEAN region. They want to be trade partners for the EU or other actors that are very much looking now at the level of emissions and requiring the kind of information that we have been talking about regarding emissions. But just to add one additional challenge to your list of challenges, let me also highlight that we have an Article 6 framework now, and knowledge about the emissions at the corporate level will be extremely important for effective participation in the Article 6 framework. And of course, this has to go through the government. First of all, the government has to understand how it can collaborate in an Article 6 cooperative approach. But then it requires the corporate level to be ready to engage. And if the corporates are waiting for governments to put in place a framework and establish their collaboration, they will not be ready when they should be ready. So that's an additional challenge where I would really encourage companies to be more active on transparency at the corporate level. ICAT is working in ASEAN region actively with Cambodia, and I was very pleased to see my friend Sum Thi here, and with Vietnam. We have been working with Indonesia and the Philippines, and we are looking at also expanding work on this transparency of subnational and non-state actor. So I want to end here, but thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henning. Yes, that's true. There are growing interests of how you can use carbon credits in the context of, for example, carbon neutrality or like net zero emissions achievement at the corporate level. And then now the situation is quite, well, I would say, well, that's still at our, it's embryonic stage. Well, still companies are looking at how it's going to be developed. And then last week, actually, well, in this pavilion, well, our sister program, I would say, from JICA SPI Nama, SPI NDC, project organized for the similar side event focusing on private sector engagement in East Asian countries. And then the carbon credits and carbon emissions trading was one of the key topics. And then I think still, well, we really need to see how it's going to be developed, but it's going to be very fast. It's going to be very fast, so that I think together with the scope 3 issues, and I think companies are probably very much for accelerating their efforts to work on that part. Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think Nicolette is ready to respond to any of these questions or any other things what you want to say.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me again. A great pleasure to be here. And just thinking about what has already been put forward in the conversation, I think I'll try and draw some threads together. So CDP, we've been running the Global Environmental Disclosure Platform for about 22 years. We now have, over the last few years, we've had a huge surge, particularly in emerging markets and most excitingly in Asian countries, into the system. And why this is important is, transparency is at the heart of our theory of change in a very similar way. But we don't do it just for data, right? We really believe that the process, it's the disclosure and the mechanism of disclosure is the bedrock to environmental action. And it's obvious, right? And we have created a sort of transition journey. When we look back at the last 20 years and we look back at the corporate work that has happened, and then the standards that have followed, and then the regulation that follows that. That's at the heart of how we believe things change. There's been 5 key steps, right? Step 1 is accounting for stuff, measuring stuff, right? CDP and others were driving this in a very major way until about 2018. That was the core focus. And essentially there, when you do that, you're triggering a shift, what I call a shift and catalyzing internal infrastructure within corporate governance, which starts to take account of and measure things that it wasn't measuring before, and then seeking to have that be embedded in its governance. And then you see this next step, which is about forward looking. And that is about, okay, so that's your scenario analysis. That's your risks and opportunity assessments. That's the action and the strategy you're going to take. And you can see many standards, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure being the key one there. And now you have the very exciting International Sustainability Standards Board at the IFRS Foundation. Now, Asian countries and ASEAN countries are membership of the IFRS. And CDP has launched this year a partnership with the ISSB to integrate that standard fully into our system. And why that matters is we believe we can support making that a regulation in every country in a quarter of the time, because we help make it makes it doable for companies. So by the time the regulation has to come, they've already been doing it. Step 3 is where you set a target. And we've seen an incredible growth in companies setting targets. Now, I think one of the first things I mentioned, the bedrock, this disclosure being the bedrock. What we see is in year 1 of when a company joins our system, there's about 38% of them who have set a target. By year 3, they're at 68%, right? So this is that's why we believe the mechanism itself really works. And it's not the disclosure that's passive. It's the fact that the data then goes to investors who are shareholders in these companies, and critically to supply to big buyers. And for ASEAN companies, we've found that supply chains are the most powerful driver to this. And that makes sense, right? Your client really matters to you as a company. And so we have in Japan and the ASEAN region a huge growth in our supply chain membership. So right now, globally, we have 280 companies, and including the federal government of the United States, the Japanese government, who are members, and they seek to have their suppliers disclose through our system. And in fact, President Biden announced that that will now become a rule for all suppliers in the United States for the federal government. And they come into the system, and we found that for the ASEAN countries, the last year, we had a jump in the across all Asian countries of 61%. Now, the full increase in our system was 48. So this is the biggest shift is coming from Asian countries, right? Japan is one of those leading countries. China is now our second biggest disclosure across the globe. But we also have really exciting jumps in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, etc. And at the same time, so coming back to those targets, you've seen a standard emerge, the Science-Based Targets Initiative. We've helped co-found that with WWF, WRI, and with the UN Global Compact. And again, that's where we see a big jump in Asian companies. Japan, again, leading the way. But really excitingly, more and more companies in the last year, a big jump in Indonesia, a big jump in China, some coming in Thailand, in Malaysia. It's very, very exciting. So that's that third step, right? Now, what needs to happen there? You need to start seeing that being brought into regulation, and you can see it being referenced in some regulation already as a target setting methodology. It will be phrased as aligned with science. And of course, it's not the only standard that may emerge in the space, but the really important thing is that companies can have their targets verified to be aligned with science. And then the fourth step, which I think is really where the action is now, is what we call transition planning, which is the most obvious thing to say, right? Because once you've set a target, you've got a strategy, you need a plan. But there's so much momentum now of embedding that within the standards. What does a plan look like? The UK government has just brought out a framework which tells companies what's really important for investors and for regulators and others to know whether this company is actually aligning with the target. And then finally, you have measurement of performance. I'll just end off with one thing. You mentioned Scope 3. And first of all, of course, it is challenging, right? But companies have been doing this for 22 years. Now, the thing with Scope 3, this is not the purest accounting exercise, right? It's important you get it. It's important you know and you get it right, but that's not the reason for why Scope 3 matters. Scope 3 matters is because you start to take accountability of your value chain. And why does that matter? Well, first of all, by doing the accounting, you can work out the reason we focused on Scope 3 for so many years is you can work out where your biggest issues are. That's critical. And then number two, and if you think of this COP, and we're talking about emerging markets and developing countries, by companies taking account of that, they then start to work with their suppliers. And we've seen that time and time again, where they work with their suppliers to support them to decarbonize. And in fact, in many developing countries, we found that's so if they have a supplier so say someone from the global north of the United States has a supplier in a developing country, and you compare their emissions of that supplier with the emissions of a company in the United States making the same products and services, oftentimes that supplier has lower emissions because they have newer technologies. So the assumption that people have, which is that companies will just move away from certain markets because of their supply chain emissions, is actually not true. We see them leaning in to build resilience in their supply chain, to build the capacities needed and the finance flows needed to help develop those suppliers. So I think Scope 3 is one of the greatest opportunities we have for global cooperation, and also to shift the capital allocation to where it needs to be as soon as possible. And finally, I couldn't agree more with my colleague Henning here about adaptation. We see companies, and I spoke here at a Japanese pavilion a few days ago for the Japanese government about this. Companies are very far behind on understanding the physical risks coming their way. And I think that's an area we need to see a lot more focus coming out of this COP and into future COPs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolette. Wow, that's a huge challenge, of course. And I think well, you have highlighted many different things so we should do as a homework, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to start off our conversation. And I think PaSTI is willing to take it. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Now I would like to invite Bonar to hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yes. So can I ask you to share your thoughts, perspectives? Maybe you can also introduce yourself, background as well.
Sure, Kato-san, and I appreciate the invitation and thank you for having me. I have spent most of my career talking to the senior executives of large and small, medium-sized corporations in the Philippines to try to help them understand the environmental, social, and governance issues of their business, to help them embed this in the risk management and strategy building decision-making processes. I've also spent a bit of time providing support to public sector in terms of technical assistance to create the sustainability reporting standards for our Securities and Exchange Commission, and also providing inputs to our lawmaking process around disclosure, not just on GHG, but also disclosure around marine litter, which is part of the big environmental impacts in our market, including also work with our central bank to look into the environment and social risk management system. So having said that, it feels to me listening to the speakers that has come before me, it felt like there's very little that I can add in terms of value on top of what has already been said. However, I'd like to elaborate a little around the context of adaptation and also at the context of having strong regulations that enable mainstreaming and adoption, widespread adoption in the private sector. My work in the past has given me opportunity to see the progress of maturity of private sector on how they adopt certain environmental reporting standards, so sustainability reporting standards such as GRI back long ago when it was really very, very in its early stages. And what I realized is that the more mature and path-breaking companies are very quick in terms of adopting whatever new standards out there that they could possibly adopt to align with international standards. And I've seen 10 years ago that despite the many trainings that we have provided, capability building on GHG accounting and also sustainability reporting, only 9-10% of the publicly listed companies have actually reported on sustainability. And until we have supported the Philippine government. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I thought I got cut off. So until we supported the Philippine government to really craft a regulation on how companies in the Philippines, all publicly listed companies, should report on their sustainability, including the GHG emissions. We have not really seen any major increase in adoption of reporting. And now with the regulation, you could expect about 80-90% compliance already. And even then, even with the regulation, you can still see companies who are still trying to explain why they cannot. It's a report or explain mechanism. So I would really emphasize on, I like the pathway that our colleague from CDP has laid down. I do totally agree with that. But I would really emphasize around the need for regulation as far as getting most of the companies to adopt. And regulation may not necessarily just be around reporting. It could also be around creating the roadmap, transition roadmap, national transition roadmaps. There has to be a clear pathway in terms of adoption of certain new low carbon technologies, such as e-vehicles, for example, the transition to renewable energy generation. For example, Malaysia and Indonesia have already looked at decarbonization pathway of their energy. The energy sector of Malaysia has already looked at different areas in different areas of utilization of certain energy that allows them to transition to low carbon. There's a really clear pathway that signals to the private sector that this is what the country wants in terms of direction, and therefore they can align their investment decision making towards that pathway. I think that's really critical. And I think the leadership of the Ministry of Environment, OECC, is critical in terms of helping the ASEAN to have that common pathway. But if we want to transition as an integrated set of countries, there needs to be not just standards, but common reference in terms of how each of the countries will decarbonize. Of course, there will be nuances, but if there is a common roadmap, direction that is informed by science, that will really signal the businesses operating in this region to also come up to that level of decarbonization. And as far as I've seen, the large corporations in the Philippines have already set their net zero targets towards 2040, 2050. And I very much like the framework of CDP because of the levels of the rating levels. You know, the companies respond very much to A, B, C, D, E rating. And the rating levels, you know, we've used CDP in terms of advising our clients. It really is a very good roadmap as far as how companies will mature. And, you know, even though this is really a good standard, you would expect this only among the major large corporations. The smaller ones still are not sensitive to how they're rated in terms of ESG, primarily because many of their investors are local. They're not subscribing to international investors. So I also agree that to reach out to them, you might want to reach out through the supply chain pathway, the large corporations influencing their suppliers. That could also do the work. But like I said, the regulation to enable that compliance for everyone is critical. One of the great ideas, great models that is really working well, very effective in the context of adaptation, is the NGFS. NGFS, as you may know, is a network for the greening of the financial sector. And it's composed, as of last year, composed of 121 central banks, including the Philippines. And the NGFS has provided a clear roadmap on how central banks could actually regulate and impose certain environment and social risk management framework and processes in the banks. And we're supporting a number of banks. And so the central bank in the Philippines has adopted that NGFS framework. And because of that adoption, there's a widespread implementation for all of the banks because it now has become a regulatory requirement. And all the banks now in the Philippines are struggling, actually grappling with whatever they can utilize in terms of information and frameworks and processes to ensure that they will be able to set up and integrate as part of their entire credit cycle before they consider a client, a borrower, all throughout credit granting process. They would already consider the implications of climate change from a resilience adaptation standpoint, but also how this client potential borrower will have actually considered the transition risk relevant to its carbon emissions or the use of products and technologies that will necessarily become obsolete in the context of the transition to low carbon. So because this is now becoming a criteria and a requirement for the banks, then that would actually trickle down to all the enterprises who are looking to raise capital from the loans and financial services that they will acquire. So it's a huge, huge opportunity. And because it is a concerted effort among central banks and it targets the financial system, it has a ripple effect as far as implementation. And that includes not just transparency, but really the institutionalization of the right management approach to manage transition risks from a GHG point of view, including scope 3. But more importantly, especially in our context, that they have to be able to manage the physical climate impacts that could potentially topple down their business and reduce their capability to pay and meet their credit obligations to the bank. So those are, lastly, I would say that we are already in a climate emergency. There was a question around incentives. I think we're all way past incentives now. I think we have to move very quickly to get governments to have a clear pathway, clear regulation, so that everyone will have to come up to that standard, to that minimum requirement, so that it will enable a more quicker and more mainstream transition to low carbon and resilient economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Now, Marisan, you have a slide prepared so that I would like to ask is the screen ready?
Okay, maybe we are kind of time running up, so I just start talking. Before just starting my comment on that topic, actually, I very appreciate that your videos and her presentation, because even in Japan, Nicholas said that Japan is leading the disclosing the non-financial information. Still, the local companies or small, medium-sized company has no capacity to disclose any GHG emission information. So I talked to them, and they don't understand why we should do this. But this video showed that reason why you have to do it, because for example, you mentioned that now you have to do this because of the many countries in ASEAN has a requirement, regulation, as shown in the slide. There's so many taxonomies in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, but this is actually pressure or incentives why you have to do this. And can you? Yeah, you can see that so many taxonomies in ASEAN countries. And I don't know, these are incentives or disincentives for the companies. And the next please. But even in Japan, actually, we don't have a taxonomy, but we have the corporate governance code to disclose the non-financial information, include the GHG emission. In fact, next please, next. In fact, and the listed company in the prime market is now enforced to disclose any climate-related information under the TCFD. But now, any asset managers, asset owners mentioned in Japan, actually, this is not only the prime markets company, growth market, other markets. And not only the listed company, but also the non-listed company has to follow this because of you mentioned the value chain or supply chains. It's actually required to the listed company to manage all the GHG emission. It's scope 3, right? And so you can see that now Japan started such a regulation, but still so many medium-sized company in Japan don't understand why. So definitely we need the incentive. Then next, please. Okay. Now Mitsubishi UFJ has actually some a program to disclose that finance the emission for our customers, because our customers, some of the top leading companies has a capacity to disclose the information, but other company doesn't. Now, local banks in Japan has a facility to provide a service for emission reduction information disclosing to their customers. So it's very important. I just stop here, but this is some methodology for financing company to make that their customer disclose their situation. I think this is one of the incentives for them, because the loan is a very important for the small medium-sized companies. Yeah, yes, I stop.
Thank you very much, Mari-san. I think you have framed for the incentives and maybe pressures that private companies are feeling, and that are actually the motivation for their actions toward for greenhouse gas emissions, for including transparency action, but also the mitigation reduction actions. Maybe in future, maybe we should work on the adaptation front. But I think that's something we should highlight for in communicating with companies, colleagues in respective countries. Now our event has come to the end, but if there's any questions or comments, burning ones from the floor, I would like to take one. If there are any questions, comments from the floor, maybe can I invite you to raise your hand? Maybe none? Okay. Okay. So then I would like to okay, there's one friend here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Mr. Sherif from West Africa in Guinea. I'm very happy to understand that Japan is the solution of the world. That is very important. And I greet every partner here in Japanese and West African country in Africa. So I wanted to tell you that my country is very, very important in terms of agriculture, in terms of forestation, in terms of, what do you say, many projects that we can do, because we have many, is raining many times for our country. That's that information that I want to give you, because we have interested for the partnership in the agriculture way, because we have many space for agriculture and the forestation and the training. That's why I'm very happy to contact the Japanese people that to exchange about that opportunities in my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing a very important comments. Okay, there's another one. Another one. Sorry. Okay, gentlemen. Yeah, please. Okay, so this is the end probably.
Thank you very much for the speaking. And also I am coming from the Istanbul, Turkey. My company, all Turkey seaside cleaning, garbage plastic. We work just now, we have got the technology. We work in 50 countries. And also, I listen to all the speakers, and I want investment to do Japan's seaside, Pacific and Mediterranean, very dirty just now. On the, do you know, no, don't give the garbage marble vessel, don't garbage service. And also, we have got the technology how we can Japan's environment ministry together clean the seaside. If you clean the sea, fish coming. If you don't clean the sea, I am sorry, no fish, no tourist. And also very, very important, sea, lake, river must be clean. Too much money don't eating. And also, thank you very much. And also, I want to touch Japan's government and environment. If you will help to us, I can help and investment to do Japan's seaside clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. So now I would like to wrap up this very important event. Thank you very much for spending time with us this morning. Today, we wish shed a light on the greenhouse gas emissions in facility level, especially the scope 3 emissions in supply chains. And we had a nice mixture of panelists, international and also governments and also international organizations, and also the people who are working on the international standard, and also I think also people from the private sector. And I think well, this is a very challenging issue, and well, especially for the Southeast Asian countries, governments, and also the private sector. Well, this question is quite new, but now we have witnessed for that. Well, there is some very important indicative actions that are already happening on the ground, and I think for the next 6 months, or next 12 months, well, it's going to be quickly growing, and then our work is there, and we are working on that directions, especially because we are aware that governments, private sector has a really strong appetite to work on this, and Japan is willing to work together with you, with the governments, with the private sector, and also partners, colleagues who are working on the this transparency and climate actions agenda. So with this, I would like to say thank you all for your active participation today. Thank you very much.
Conversation with the panelists, our guest speaker.